Had the temple of Seti I, called Aptu, that the Arabs called Abydos, telling of the first holy city where pilgrimages took place right here. You had to climb up the 42 steps going into this temple. Right here in the temple of Seti I, over 3,000 years ago, in the world's first holy city called Aptu, where pilgrimages took place, where our ancestors came here to pay homage to Asar. Let's go inside of the temple to see the world's first Immaculate Conception and Resurrection story for an eyewitness account that our ancestors left us over 3,000 years ago. Now look at this. You can see where the Western world church got its design. Long before you had this, the Patah Soka Shrine was already there. For those of you who are just coming in, this is the earliest architectural structure that they call Roman arches. No such thing as Roman arches. These are African arches. If you were to take Western architecture, they say this is Roman arches, but you see this is known thousands of years ago, and this is called Patah Soka Shrine. And here we see the earliest Immaculate Conception. Immaculate means clean. That means she has known no other man. No other man has entered her body. She will have a clean conception. It's the Europeans who corrupted the story, and now we are looked at as a European Madonna and Child, where the concept was copied from here. Keep in mind that the only person who mentions the Immaculate Conception is Luke. Mark doesn't mention it, and then also Matthew doesn't mention it, and John doesn't mention it. Luke mentions it only in terms of being clean. That literally means only one man has entered her body, and that is the seed of Asar. That means clean conception. That's what immaculate means, until later on at the conference of Ephesus, where our goddess Aset was de-Africanized, where they brought on this whole immaculate conception of the European image of the Madonna and Child that was copied from here. Come in and see the Immaculate Conception. This is called the Patah Soka Shrine, by the way, Patah Soka Shrine. Many of the reliefs have been chiseled out. Fortunately, this one is here telling of the first virgin birth resurrection story, where the goddess Aset forms herself into a bird and descends on top of Asar's penis. Although you see the chiseling out of his penis, because many of the Europeans who were coming in during the Roman times could not deal with the sacredness of the body like Theodosius and Justinian and others. But Isis is going to take the seed from his body to impregnate herself. And this is the earliest concept of the Immaculate Conception, long before an angel of the Lord and Gabriel coming to Mary and said she's going to be with the Holy Child. Look how Asar is lying out on the bed. Look how the Romans copied the concept. Let's go to Rome. See the Pope lying out on the same bed, same hedge crown that Asar is wearing as well, same funeral beds, even got the lion heads that you see right here, even down to the detail of the lion heads of the funeral bed. Now, the only difference is, instead of a bird perpendicular to the Pope, they have the white Mary and Jesus, the European Mary and Jesus. But here, let's take and put Aset right above here, and you got the same story, the prototype of the Madonna and Child, where she was known as the Theotokos, the Mother of God. Then she in turn becomes impregnated, and she's in the form of, in this form, as the Mheted Ra, or the sacred baboon, because the baboon representing birth. You see her stomach swelled up, but she also forms the Zoop type, okay, of the hippo. Why the hippo for the Zoop type? Because the hippo comes out of the water. It bursts out of the water, okay? And a woman looks something like a hippo. No insult, but they saw that that symbolically shows that she's impregnated, and how the hippo comes out of the water is symbolically like breaking her water. So the Zoop type that they used was the hippo. So Aset is now impregnated with the holy seed of Asar that she had taken from him when she formed herself into the bird, as you see the falcon. You know it's Aset because that's her glyph for Aset. She is now impregnated with the Holy Child. Here we see it, the earliest Holy Child concept of a virgin birth story. Here's the prototype of it all. This was the origin where people would come in. These temples were covered in sand. After they took everything they wanted, then it was covered up. Time took them over. Now we're dug out to come back to see where the story came from. The earliest Immaculate Conception and Resurrection story. Unfortunately, you can't see her on the donkey, because that is too obvious right here.
And they have been able to trace it through blood studies, DNA, analysis of DNA polymorphisms, and they could show you that the black woman carries everything No other woman does. She carries every element. There is a certain stage at which there's a break off, and one of those elements is just resides in her. It doesn't reside in other people. It doesn't make them inferior, but it makes it quite clear that they are branches, mutations, extensions of that central woman. Took a rib out of the complex male and made woman. Woman, in fact, is physiologically more complex than the male. Hence, women cannot come out of men. Eve cannot come out of Adam. Only Adam can come out of Eve. Isis, the great goddess, affected, as I say, Europe as deeply as she affected Africa. All major European powers built shrines to the black goddess Isis. Even the Roman lunatic Caligula built a shrine to Isis. Out in the British Isles we find shrines to Isis. That was the beginning of the Black Madonna. You go to Nuria in Spain, not just black with Africoid features. Some of them later on became black-skinned but with European features, because as some of them became destroyed or lost or broken, they would build them again and retain the blackness of ancient times, but they would give them European type features. Sometimes the child would be African, but the woman would have a European face but a black skin. And then later when this was found, and of course the movement against the African, or the reduction of the African, became something that became significant in the life of Europe, then they would try to explain it away. The reason why it looks black is because it's been gathering dust over the ages. Soot. The reason why it looks black, it fell into fire. The reason why it looks black, they used the wrong clay. Anything to explain it away. But when you go to the roots of the religion, when Jesus died, he was not considered important except by his followers. The Europeans did not have any respect for Jesus the Christ. There was no Christianity in Europe. The only people who had Christianity were the Africans. The word Christ is an African word, K-R-S-T. When the Greeks later on took that up, and the Romans they call Christus, it is first appears in African Christ. The concept of the Christ, the 8th form, the 7 stages or forms of man, which then becomes the supreme divine form, the Christ. Hence you have Christianity before Christ. The idea, the concepts, even the words, even the images, the virgin birth. The 3 kings, those are Egyptian ideas. Those were the 3 great stars in the firmament, the 3 kings, which then became the 3 powers on earth that came to worship the divine form. It's all there. It's on the temples of Luxor before the birth of Jesus. And then when Jesus came, making myth real as only gods can do. When Jesus came and he died, the sword that was pushed into him was a European sword. The Romans cut him to pieces because the Jewish high priest wanted it. Because Jesus challenged, as all rebels do, as all men of truth do, challenged the order of the day. And he had to be sacrificed for that. It was Isis and her little child Horus, suckling at her breast, that was worshipped throughout the world as Mary and her child Jesus. And when we first see Jesus on a coin in the 2nd century AD, there is a Roman face, European, and on the other side is a man with dark skin, woolly hair, and a Semitic nose, an Afro-Semitic type, who is represented for the first time physically, Jesus the Christ.
Bobby Hemmett from Atlanta,
You're my makeup woman. The secret society has its origin in the Moorish system. As a matter of fact, actual outfits that the clan wear. I'm not talking about the ones where you see somebody cut some holes in some sheets, but I'm talking about the real grandmaster outfits and the ones that's really done up with, you know, with the actual cross and the robe with the cape and the pine cone hat. That's all Egyptian initiation outfits brought up into Europe by the Moors. In order to do this, we need to understand a little more about the Moors and the concept, and that basically what was the divine plan. The Moors are nothing but a consortium of Camite Egyptians. For the people that don't know what Camite means, or Kemet, or Camite, or Egyptian priesthood, mainly the temple of Kom-Ombo in Egypt, or Kemet, the temple of Isis, or Aset, the last temple of Isis, which was one of the last temples to be closed at Philae, as well as other Sufi orders in Arabia that have their origin in what is called Kushite Arabia, in which Moorish institutions. And they set up those particular things in those particular societies. So what are some of the sciences that basically the Moors brought? Well, we know of all the learning and all the stuff that the Afrocentric movement told you, all of the stuff that the Moors brought. But let's get into some of the esoteric traditions. Basically, when you go in those New Age stores, and all that stuff that they got the New Age stores is dealing with, is nothing but all of the stuff that they basically conserved from the Moorish science of all of the stuff that secret societies had. And when you see all that stuff, they give it a new name. Esoteric teachings, New Age, and all that stuff. All that is nothing but Moorish science that they basically became the custodians of. And now trying to fake as being white in these so-called New Age bookstores, or what they call occult bookstores. You see what I'm saying? That's all that stuff is. Just put a new name on it, and you thinking it's some white people shit. So your tarot cards, you see them, this fortune telling, the tarot, that was introduced by the Moors. From the tarot cards, you get the playing cards, introduced by the Moors. You see what I'm saying? All your divination systems, they got little stuff they throw down, little stones called runes, introduced by the Moors. The crystal ball, this is real deal stuff that works, divination, introduced by the Moors. Your incense, frankincense and myrrh, all that introduced by the Moors. Gunpowder, you thought it was China, it got its root in alchemy. It has its root in alchemy going back to Kemet, of the study of metals in and out the body, also introduced into Europe by the Moors, as well as your fire stick, which later on was a gun that they didn't have no use for, introduced by Moors. Well, based on their nature. You know, they didn't conceive of this thing as being a weapon or something they want to kill people with. I guess they figured, you know, white boy picked it up after them and used it. All we know is they invented the gun, the fire stick, and didn't use it. Music, classical music that we thought was a white, that's the Moors. Brought that up because the scales was invented in Egypt. It comes out of Hermetic science and ultimately out of alchemy. It is melanin put to scale. Yes. The word muse is a Greek word for components inside of the melanin. These angelic beings called muse. You get the word music. Something that inspires you. Melanin inspires you. This is all coming from the Hermetic teachings or the teachings of Tahuti. Because Hermes is Tahuti in Egypt, which is the teachings of alchemy, which is the study of melanin, the dark night of the soul. And so music, which is the components of what's heard in the body put to scale, is introduced into Europe by the Moors, classical music. They call Beethoven the Moor of Russia. Some stuff called the Greater Key of Solomon, and some stuff called the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is these magical texts introduced into Europe by the Moors. One of the benefits of Moorish teaching was Nostradamus. His teacher was a Moor. There's a movie came out, Orion Pictures Nostradamus, 1994 is when it came out. And thousands of black people that were still up in Russia up until World War II. Stalin supposed to kill 100 million Russians. How the hell are he going to kill 100 million people? If that's a number, how are you going to kill millions and millions of people, his own citizens, and they don't turn against him? They was doing ethnic cleansing and was killing leftover black Russians. What happened was the Ghettos, which was a Gnostic, Moorish people that settled into, they settled France, they settled Ireland, and they went on up into Russia and on into Bosnia. And from 1991 to 96, they killed off that black element in Bosnia of the leftover Ghettos. The Ghettos of these Moors first also settled Ireland. So when they said it, what's his name, ran the snakes out of Ireland, he was running the snake people out of Ireland, St. Patrick's. The Moors. The river dance, you see that river dance they doing? The Irish people doing that river dance? That's black. You'll see African tribes will do a dance with their legs are moving and their bodies standing straight. Their torso straight. It's the same as the river dance. They found a cross in a Celtic cross. So they talk about, see, you hear these white people talking about, see, if you go to the esoteric stores, you hear Celtic, real the Celtic. Celtic is another damn name for Moors. That's just after the Moors trained these people, they became the Celtics. These were the early people who benefited from Moorish civilization. You see what I'm saying? So Celtic. St. Patrick's Day was put in and was also upheld by the Moors in the Irish Catholicism to cover up the fact of the Moors that was there at that time. In Scotland, your bagpipes and those robes they wore, you know, your little kilt, what you call it? What's that called, a kilt? Kilt? That ain't nothing but the Egyptian robe, redone in the fabric of the land. The bagpipes and all of that. There's a cross, Celtic cross with the name on it, Bismillah, which means Allah. All of this brought up by the Moors. Your King Arthur in your round table story, which first introduced into Spain. Also, the Moors also instituted your King Arthur and your round tables. This all came out of Ireland. Then when Britain took over Ireland, the Camelot became Britain. But before, when it was in Ireland, it was supposed to be a new city at the ends of the earth. We'll get into that, which is supposed to be America. It only became Britain after. Get your movie Excalibur to try to get Excalibur, 1981, to try to get a synopsis on the King Arthur's court and the Holy Grail thing. Get the movie Excalibur, 1981, to try to learn about what the King Arthur's court is. Your Grail is supposed to be this mystical cup that's supposed to bring magical healing as well as a form of the Christ energy. All of that stuff introduced into Europe by the Moors, mainly into Ireland by the Moors. So the Irish, the original Irish, which was a lot of black people, was also settled there by the Moors. You can get the movie Secrets of Rowan Ish. Secrets of Rowan Ish, and when they talk about the Black Seal, that's the Moors. That's the Moors also. They'll talk about a Black Seal. That's also the Moors. Your Hermetic text that I talked about was introduced into the, which is called the Corpus Hermeticus, which is basically the basis of European knowledge, which they accepted the Corpus Hermeticus to give you the byproduct of some other greater mysteries, is introduced by the Moors. Your Nukian magic, you'll see, it's supposed to be this magic that was supposed to be hooked up by a guy by the name of John Dees, which is supposed to be Queen Elizabeth soothsayer. a magician, and he supposedly got contacted by these Enochian entities and gave him this system of magic where in actuality he had full run of the British Museum, which became one of the main custodians of all this leftover stuff from the Moors. And by him having full reign, he just went in there and just translated text. Anytime you see some stuff in these metaphysical bookstores where they have these old ancient texts, like the Greater Key of Solomon, and they'll say, well, these texts just mysteriously showed up in Europe, that means that they were from the Moors. There's some stuff called The Magic of Marilyn Mays, a book called The Magic of Marilyn Mays. If you ever get into that little book on the magic of Marilyn Mays, you will find all of the stuff that's in that book is Moorish science, numerology, astrology, astronomy, the Kabbalah, your Kabbalistic text, which is Jewish mysticism. The first books of the Kabbalah is the Zohar, Sefer Yetzirah, Sefer Beher. These particular books came out of Moorish Spain. The first book came out of Spain. But how did it get in Spain? They talk about the Spanish Jews. Good book on this, Moorish science and stuff, a book called People of the Secret by Ernest Scott. In that book he'll talk about the Sufis. He won't say the Moors, but he'll also say the Sufis in Spain. He's the master of the English language. You will see it up in there. But he also goes in the book and says Sufi, Suf means woolly-haired one. But Camelot, the word Camelot, comes from the word Cam, Egypt, Lot. It means the new state of Egypt, which would also be America. Get all that into also, you can find out about America being broken down and being the new state of Kemet, Washington, D.C., and all the other cities in America bear witness to that on the Masonic architecture. Mammy P. Hall wrote a book, The Secret Destiny of America. A new book called Return of the Ancient Serpent of Wisdom, which is literally the Kundalini energy, but at the end of the book he talks about the new destiny where this ancient serpent of wisdom is supposed to end up in us America, which is talking about black people. All of these texts, the Book of Enoch, the Ethiopian Book of Enoch, brought to Europe by the Moors, which predates the Old Testament and was not put in the Old Testament because it's coming from Ethiopia. The Slavic Book of Enoch. How did Slavs get a Book of Enoch? Because all that's Moorish science. You see. Turkey was a Moorish providence. Then all of a sudden Turkey get hit with a damn earthquake. But then again, we all know that based on the Hawk Project, and the white boy got the actual, the type of science to create earthquakes, hurricanes and storms, tornadoes and all that. You see. All of that coming from ancient Moorish science. Your Jews, the white Jews, introduced in the Moors or converted into Judaism by the Moors, given the Torah and given the other higher text, which is your Kabbalah. All that's Moorish science. The Kabbalah comes from the temple of Komombo in Egypt, where they got the Pharaoh holding up the same tree of life that the Jews say is supposed to be Jewish mysticism. On the temple wall, they got them holding up that same tree of life. The temple of Komombo in Egypt. Also too. The plan of the Moors was to civilize a semi-barbaric people, or make a people that halfway civilized, so we can be the benefit of this particular information once we come and get set up in America, which is also prophesied in the Greek story, Jason and the Argonauts, which this story, the guy, Apollonius, was the curator or the director of the Library of Alexandria. Then all of a sudden this story, Jason and the Argonauts, where he takes the best of the Africans, put them in a boat to sail to the ends of the earth and a land called Copper to get the golden fleece, which is a lamb's wool in Christ with the lamb's wool. A woolen fleece is called the woolen fleece or the golden fleece, and when you translate all that, it means melon, and it also means the Christ. So shall the sun, as the sun rises in the east, so shall the Son of Man rise in the west, which is the Christ. The Son of Man is the Son in man. The hidden Son, or the black Son, which is the manifestation or the crystallization of melody in a people in the West. The Hermetic text, which is the prophetic text, that is assigned to Asclepius. And Asclepius, as you know, is the god and the physician Imhotep. And Imhotep, as you know, is Asclepius, who as Asclepius. In the Hermetic text, they got a whole sermon, the perfect sermon of Asclepius. And in there is the prophecy of how we were going to go into slavery. How Egypt, which is the temple of all the gods, will become one big graveyard. And how the pious man, which is righteous man, would be looked on as impious. And how the impious man, which is the wicked man, will be considered pious, righteous. And how the weak man will be considered strong, and the strong man will be considered weak. And how everybody would look up to the wicked man will be considered noble. And how the righteous and pious man will be treated like a common criminal. And all these people in this faraway land will look like Egyptians. They will have the mind of another race.
Now that's all in prophecy.
That's all in the prophet. Imhotep starts crying. He said, well, we ever get about it. And so Houthi, who is the person that Imhotep is divining to, giving him this spiritual knowledge, said, yeah, Maya will be established. He said, where? He said, there will be a land that's not established yet, that all nations will speed towards in all types of transportation to get there. And in that land, there will be an extremity or an appendix or an annex of Egyptians that will be in that land. And they will establish Maya. I'll give you three versions of it. One, same perfect sermon of Asclepius in Walter Scott's book, Hermetica. The other book, which might be hard to get, is by Shambhala Press, but you still probably can get it in 1992, it came out again, from the 1930s. The other one, new book, is by Copenhagen, another Hermetica, which has the perfect sermon of Asclepius in it, which you can get. The other book is 3 volumes, Thrice Great Hermes, 1907 by G.R.S. Mead, which has the perfect sermon in it. Another version, which might be out of print, no, you can get it from Kessinger's Press now. So it's in print. The Kessinger out of print book company, you can get it. Another one is Anna Kingsford and Maitland's book, The Virgin of the World. It's also in there. But the one that you can more readily get is the Nag Hammadi Library, which was done up in 1945, because the origin of the Corpus Hermeticus is in the back of the book, and that perfect sermon of Asclepius is in the back of the Nag Hammadi Library, translated by James Robinson.
Mm-hmm. Now the original text was an Egyptian text that came, the original one
don't have the hieroglyphic version because, you know, the Library of Alexandria was burnt.
Okay.
But we do have the translated version in the Greek and Latin that was translated out of the Library of Alexandria. That's the text I'm telling you about. The Hermetic text.
All right.
So there's more than enough stuff. The ones that you can get right offhand, you might have to order the Copenhagen's book, which is the Hermetic text, which is probably the latest retranslation of the modern stuff. But also you can get the Nationality Library, which is all the original sayings of Jesus, or the Christ, let's put it that way. That's in, but a part of that Nationality Library is that same Hermetic text. It's in there. He said, Maya will be established. But if you go back and get, I told you there was a guy by the name of Theodore P. Ford, wrote a book called God Wills the Negro. And he explained how when the Arabs, the last invasion of Egypt, of Kemet, when the Arabs invaded, a lot of your Egyptians went to West Africa. And when they went to West Africa, when the slave trade started years later, the first people that the African kings gave up were the Egyptians, who were homeless. Living in West Africa, their empire was destroyed or taken over by the Arabs. So two versions of this. Number one, they gave them up because if you are an African king, you got to look out for your own people. So therefore, you give up the scrubs, the homeless, because you are obligated to look out for your own people. The other version is that these people came and they were very advanced in their culture, their dress, very sophisticated, and at this particular time, some of the Africans had deteriorated and they were jealous of the Egyptians. So when the slave trade came, they went looking for the Egyptians and gave them up to the doggone slave traders. This book was put out in 1939, God Wills the Negro, and by it being accurate, well, how do you tell things are accurate? You can tell by the actions of the government. The United States government came in after 2 years and confiscated all the books. Got rid of it.
Can anybody get a copy of it?
Fortunately, a few people in Chicago ended up with a few copies of the book. And as a result, this spring I received a copy of the book and a copy, the photocopy, was in perfect preserved condition, just like the original book, and that's spiritual. So I have a copy of it. Now, it proves that the original people who came to the West as slaves were these Egyptians. Because you know, part of the Negroes that the white boy got to counter the Afrocentric movement was saying, why do you all call yourselves Egyptians? You all were West Africans. But now this is the proof that part of a great deal of the people that the Africans was giving up, they gave up the Canaanites. Which also proves why there's a stela of Akhenaten found in Oklahoma in the 1930s. No, excuse me, found in the 1800s. Whenever they found this stela, they didn't even know Akhenaten existed. But they found it in Oklahoma. That's documented in Ice, the Ultimate Disaster by Richard Noon in his book. So they found this stela of hieroglyphics with Akhenaten hymns in 1800s in Oklahoma. As well as they found a group of Egyptians, Native Americans speaking, Egyptians speaking and writing ancient Kemetic language over here in Maine. All documented in Richard Noon's book, Ice, the Ultimate Disaster, 5/5/2000, which is reprinted. And he happens to be a Mason, giving us some of this particular information. But the Rosicrucians say that the capstone of the Great Pyramid is the granite that is made of the capstone of the Great Pyramid can only be found one place on the earth, Stone Mountain, Georgia. Which means that Confederate picture that you see on Stone Mountain, Georgia, if anybody else saw the picture of Stone Mountain, Georgia, where they got Raleigh Lee and all these Confederate things, that's not by accident. Because that particular mountain is an ancient relic that coincides with the pyramid, as well as pyramids of Giza. Rosicrucians also say that the white man was an experiment that went bad by the black man. The Rosicrucians say that. of the creation of the white man was taken up into Europe by the Moors. And the Rosicrucians were the ones that became the custodians of those particular documents. Rudolf Steiner, who was Adolf Hitler's teacher, who was later on run out of Germany by Adolf Hitler, and years later all of his manuscripts and stuff that he had made broken heart because of this stuff. And they later on had to go and get all of this particular information, and they got it by a series of lectures that he put on, and they got all these particular books. But there's about 20-something books. The one book that you can't find, you got to get some help research, is the one on Atlantis and Memorial, where he talks about this God took a germ and created a new race of people. Just like Elijah Muhammad said in his theology of time, that they took a germ and created a new race of people. Elijah Muhammad said in his message to the black man that the moon was separated from the earth. And so Rudolf Steiner in his book Atlantis and Memorial. Rudolf Steiner's book Atlantis and Memorial talking about the creation of the white boy. He was contemporary with H.G. Wells. So H.G. Wells wrote the novel part of this story, and that's where you get your Island of Dr. Moreau from, which is now represented in a movie in 1996, starring the master of their actors, Marlon Brando playing Yakub. But also Yakub Kirk was also a Hyksos god, translated in Donald B. Redford's book, Egypt, Canaan, and Israel, and also in a book called Bright. The guy's last name is Bright, The History of Israel. The history of Israel. So the Rosicrucians is the ones that became a custodian of a lot of the Moorish documents also. The Moors set up Europe as a result to fulfill prophecy of this vision of a new land called America, which we would come and become slaves, which is a part of the alchemical process. Now let me explain this. Slavery, although how hideous it was, is prophecy being fulfilled. I'll give you two examples. The Jason and the Argonauts, the story, is also about a slave ship. The text coming out of Samaria called Inanna's Descent. Inanna is nothing but the goddess Isis, or Aset. And she had to descend into the underworld, which is also descend into the deeper aspect of her own spirit. And the descending of that spirit, she was a royal person. And she has to strip off all of her royal garments, her royal history, and become nothing. And literally die to become a new divine goddess of the universe. So in so many words, in the process of alchemy, and alchemy is the royal art of killing. So when you go see the movie Excalibur, Merlin, the word Merlin is Morlin, which is the Moor. Merlin is talking to one of King Arthur's sisters. She said, I can see just like you, I'm a seer. He said, do you know the royal art? The royal art is alchemy. And alchemy is the study of melody. A part of the royal art is putrefaction, illumination through putrefaction. Putrefaction means to rot, to die, to disintegrate, to degrade, degenerate, and from the degeneration of future species becomes new life. The phoenix rises from the ashes. So a process of slavery is a process of alchemy. After all, alchemy is taking an original substance and making something new out of it. And that's what happened to slaves. We were originally Africans, and we were made into a new people. And as a result, like it or not, we are the knowledge on the planet in the modern time. Not the Africans, although we have a few un-African contributors. It's mainly an American phenomenon. The Afrocentric movement. You see what I'm saying? The Afrocentric movement. In the movie Highlander, the Highlander, which is Scotland, is supposed to be this immortal being. And he said, you can't die, which is also talking about us, because we can't die. We die, our souls don't die. He said, you're supposed to reincarnate, or you're supposed to be immortal until the last days. He said, until there's a land that's not established yet. This is more science. And in that land, we will have a gathering. When there's only a few of us left, we will have a gathering. And in that gathering, we will fight for the prize. The gathering that they're talking about is this whole conscious movement that came about, that we've been going through, and we're going through as we speak right now. All these minds gathering together to get the prize, the final solution. So so you'll find that in Highlander 1, the Ouija board was produced by also a form of that particular divination system produced by the Moors. All your hermetic science, your Kabbalah, all forms of alchemy, the Grail mythology, forms of Gnosticism, which is esoteric Christianity, all forms of Sufism. Suf means woolly-headed one. Also, in Ernest Scott's book, he said that the Moors traveled up into Europe to introduce alchemy to the Europeans to try to somehow make a non-aberrant man. Now what does aberrant mean? The word aberrant means abnormal, unusual, and unnatural. So they traveled to Europe somehow to make a non-abnormal man. That's in Ernest Scott's book, People of the Secret. You see. And they did this by trying to use alchemy. They failed, but that's what happened. You'll also find out about the Tamaru that I was talking about in Diop's book, African Origins of Civilization, Myth, and Reality. It's just he left out the part of the part on where there are actually created white people as statements. But Champollion, when he translated hieroglyphics, wrote back to Champollion the Elder, and gave him this particular information about this Tamaru person. And he was really upset when he found the origins of what his people and how the Egyptians used his people as being these abnormal people. But it even knew that even Champollion didn't even translate the hieroglyphics. They had some black man over there that translated them because they couldn't get it. And the black man just looking at it, spiritually translated, like you just got niggas that come off the ghetto, and niggas just come off the farm know how to fix a car. They didn't go to school, they just look at the cars and fix it. You know people like that. My grandfather couldn't read, but he was a mathematical genius. And he knew the geometry and all that shit by mind. And he used to build these mansions for these white people. That's how my grandmother became one of the richest women in the damn, in Mullins, South Carolina and shit. She was at least 1,000 there. You see what I'm saying? But couldn't read. So this man went in there and translated hieroglyphics of brothers. And Champollion gets the credit for it. You see. But there's all types of stuff on this abnormal man. Numerology, astrology, astronomy, geometry, which is a numerical system on the breakdown of the angelic system of the angelic beings as far as their numbers. It's called geometry. The whole system broken down on angels, but that system put together, when you put it all together, it's broken down in the angelic being is comprised inside of the melody. Inside of the melody. The Goetian, leprosy of Solomon that I talked about. The Goetian, leprosy of Solomon all of a sudden a mysterious Moorish manuscript, which the left key of Solomon, when they say left, they mean inner. Our is the greater, which is astrology. The lesser, which is the most potent. These seals, it's all Moorish manuscript, translated from Arabic by the Ghettos. It's all Moorish science. There's 72 seals within the melanin. The seals of Solomon. Sol, which means sun. Amun, which means hidden, means black sun. Solomon. The temple of Solomon is the temple of the black man. Solomon and Amun-Ra is the same. Amun-Ra and Osiris, all that's the same thing, talking about the soul of black people. That's just the Hebrew version of it. These seals is what melanin is broken down from the Library of Alexandria of the Egyptian system. And in these seals consist of 30 to 40 legions each seal, and a legion is 10,000. So we're talking about 7,400,000 entities with inside of your own makeup of your spiritual body and inside of the melanin. All this is Moorish manuscript. Comes out of Moorish. But even in this book, they say, well, where did this stuff come from? They say it originates out of the third eye, these seals, called Sitakosh. Sit, which means black, sit, soot, Akash, which means black. Akashic records. Then you hear the word Akashic records? That's melanin. That's melanin. Anytime you hear the book in the Bible where they say these records will be opened up, and they will have people's names will be in these seals and these records, and the ones whose name is not written in them books will be cast in a fiery furnace. In order for you to have your name written in the damn record, your ass got to have the record. And the record is nothing but melanin. So if you don't have the fucking melanin, you're cast in a fiery furnace. The fiery furnace or the fires of hell is the Kundalini energy, which is the serpent energy that runs up your spinal cord. And if you don't have these records, which means if you don't have the pineal gland, your ass will burn up. Our God is an all-consuming fire. That fire is the Kundalini fire. That fire will burn your ass up if you don't have the pineal gland, in which the fire can synthesize the melanin with. All of this is coming from the Moors. These Goetia systems. All of this is coming from the Moors. Still available. Not just this hardcover, but the paperback is still available by McGregor Mallet. All of that stuff is coming from the Moors. Still dealing with the clans now. So I was breaking this shit down. Camelot in the Moor's dream is also America. This is the new lot of Egypt. And has the Egyptians in it. Can't be Europe, can't be Britain. Because the most Africans are in the Western Hemisphere, and that will conclude the Caribbean on into here, but the most advanced, despite what people tell you, is the one that's right up under the belly of the beast. The empire. That's us. We're the ones that went through more of the alchemical process of forgetting who we are and dying. Even more so than the Caribbeans, because they still have a form of African culture left behind because they were still a part of a tropical area. You see, anybody, even the Caribbeans, bear witness that we are the most fucked up, but the most fucked up is the most advanced. We're the ones that they able to. We'll get into that when we get more into the aspect of that, the esoteric aspect. The movie Braveheart is dealing with the African origins of Scotland and how the British tried to breed the African aspect out of the Moors out in Braveheart. He said that we can't fight them all, we'll breed them all. Well, I thought that these white people are all the same. They were talking about black. So, the Moors set up America. You hear the Moors always talking about that. You know, on the back of your dollar bill, It says Benjamin Banneker, but it also could be $2 bills. It's this black president called Hampton. He talked about all of that. That the Moors talk about. That the Moors talk about. Horrible as far as the process of slavery. But then again, on the other hand, it's prophesied in the Bible, because up until World War II, the only people who fulfilled the prophecies of Solomon or the book of Psalms of these people suffering was black people in America and the Caribbean in the great diaspora, until a joint project with Hitler and the Jews, because Hitler was Jewish, and the head state of the Jews who would try to front their way into history. They set up the whole Holocaust thing and sacrificed for their people to go into the Holocaust thing. And there wasn't no 6 million. Most Jewish scholars will tell you it's only like 600,000. That's just a symbolic representation of their suffering. But anyway, they set up this whole Holocaust thing so that they could authentically set themselves up as being the Jews that will be persecuted. And so therefore that led to the state of Israel. That's all a plan of the Illuminati secret society to make a historical Jew out of a non-historical Jew. And in order to do that, he had to suffer like the book of Psalms. And up until the World War II, we were the only people that fulfilled that prophecy. And after World War II, most people think that they're the ones that suffer. And they created their suffering. There's a whole book called The Creation of Ancient Israel that shows how these crackers go through history to try to authenticate their particular history and make up history just to make themselves the original Jews. The new book I call The Creation of Ancient Israel. Ancient Israel. I think that guy's name is Whiteman. I'm not sure. This book, the two books put out by the Jews, right? They deal with that particular Jewish part. And after they lost the Civil War, the Jews said, well, we must find a new way of slavery, and they went into the drug trade and opium, and later on into crack and cocaine and all the stuff we have now. But all of this is a connection to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And half those particular ones that was pardoned from the assassination was Masons, because they inducted the president at that time into Masonry, and he pardoned all the Masonic people, and the ones that got blamed for it, like John Wilkes Booth, was non-Mason. The Masonic side, they understand the prophecy. They now became the custodians of all of this information. They understand that these people one day are going to rise up and come into their own and be this great nation within a nation. They understand the prophecy. So in order to do this, they got to retard our progress. So in order to do this, they got to retard our progress. Stay on top of it. Including Thomas Jefferson. In his book, Notes on America, I think he only wrote one book, so whatever it is. Notes on America, I think. Notes on Virginia. That these particular people, black people, we either have to ship them out of the country, deport them back to Africa, or we have to exterminate them. In this book, the Nephilim say that most of the history is recorded by individuals. Understand, he was speaking on behalf of his Masonic lodge. And this is policy of the lodge he is saying. So when he said that black people either have to be shipped back to Africa or exterminated, he was talking on the behest of the lodge that he was a part of. That same southern jurisdiction, Freemasonry, in 1993, one 33rd Freemason admits to Bill Cooper, who wrote a lot of books on the Masonic Illuminati conspiracy, that it was always a contention of the Masonic society who basically run the country to always put blacks in slavery after a short period of time. It's a part of the Masonic tradition. By them knowing prophecy, and by them understanding that we are their enemies, and by us never failing to understand that we have a fucking enemy. And whenever he's nice to us and we get along, it's still a master-slave relationship. So of course white people treat us all right now. overtly because they own every damn thing. Shit, if you own the world, you can afford to give up some damn slack. So ain't no shit about us equal. If it's a master-slave relationship, we ain't got a pot to piss in, a bed to shove it under, or a window to throw it out of. Always a master-slave relationship whenever they say we are at peace. See? Let's flip the damn script, and you will have that same old crap, which he still is now. He just updated his racism because he's more in charge now. You see? And he could not be a technical slave master with the old outmoded ways.
For the Grand Master himself, Ursa Ma'at Ra, Septepen Ra, Ramesu Meriamun of the 19th dynasty. That's Ramesu II, the four massive colossals that you see him sitting on his Haru throne. Now the colossal that you see right here that's fallen, some say that that was due to an earthquake. We're not sure because we know how the plunders have come through. Is that right? Right. Here we see this facade is 100 feet tall and the colossal statues are 65 feet tall. The Grand Master himself and one of the greatest structures that he built right here in Abu Simbel. Dedicated to Ra Harakte that you see right in the facade of the temple, meaning the rising of the sun. Here the Grand Master here got his Tajeti. That means his Grand Master builder made to build this structure for him. Like I said, just like Imhotep who built for Zoser-Neterket, and also like Zosem-Ankh who built for Sneferu, and Ankh-Kuf who built for Khufu, the Grand Master's name here who built this is named May. At the top you see them Imheted Ra. You see 24 Imheted Ra or baboons. These baboons were sacred to Kemet because it represented the 24 hours of the day. But here you see 24 hours that Ra gives us time. Imheted Ra, the sacred baboon, associated with Ra because he gives praise to the sun as it rises in the east. So the Zoop type or the zoomorphic type is the baboon that you see on the top of the facade. Then also down by his legs you see his wife Nefertari, the most beautiful Nefertari II, but this whole structure was dismantled. It was 200 feet down in the water. To save it, they had to take it apart piece by piece and 20,000 tons of rocks, stone, cutting it out and setting it 600 feet back where you presently see it at today. So it's not in its original position, but fortunately it was saved for us to see. On the right side, you'll see the Ta-Nehisi, or Nubians. On the left side going in, you'll see the Hittite forces. Now we had our own civil war. Now I've heard other guys say that those are slaves on the other side. Those are not slaves, they are captives of war. Just like you have the captives of war of the Hittites. And keep in mind that Nefertari is the queen that he married. She is a Ta-Nehisi. Who is he marrying? He's marrying his beginning. What is his beginning? Ta-Nehisi, the mother of Tameri. Here the temple sits on the south. Nefertari sits on the north side. Look at both of the temples here, structures here, because here we see this great Sultan king who had 50 wives. But it was that one wife, Nefertari, who was the most special wife, that he built a temple for her. That wasn't done again until Taj Mahal did the same thing for his wife. But where was it started at first? It started right here. As Ra rises in the east, the temple was set on its axis and all the way down to the hypostyle hall that Ra would rise in back of the temple. Now, when you go inside, there are 8 colossal statues of Ursa Ma'at Ra, Septepen Ra, in the Osirian position. The Osirian position, 2 feet together, and he's standing like this, going all the way to the back of the Ankh Manu, or the Holies of the Holies. In the back of the Holies of the Holies, he has made himself one with the divine netters. That means to the far left is Ptah. Ptah, who is the architect of the universe, who's the one that says, let there be light. After that, we see it is Amun, and then Ramesu and Ra Harakte, all the way in the back of the Ankh Manu, or the most holy place of the temple. On the temple, you'll see the continuous stories of his battles of Kadesh. the battles he fought with the Hittite forces. You see the massive colossals of this Grand Master sitting on the throne. And we've been mentioning this great Sultan's name, Ursa Ma'at Ra Septepen Ra Ramesu Murray Amen of the 19th dynasty around 1298 to 1232 BCE, before the Christian era. His royal name, Ursa, the power, Ma'at, truth, justice, and righteousness. Under Ra, God, Septepen Ra, he's chosen by Ra. Ramesu, he's born of Ra, and he's loved by Amen. As you see him on the royal Shanus right here, sitting on the Nepti. That's the name where Nubia came from, Nepti meaning gold. Ursa is the power of Ma'at, truth, justice, and righteousness for the Sultan king to sit on the throne, okay? Under God, Ra. Septepen Ra, he's chosen by Ra. He's chosen by God. Ramesu, he's born of Ra, okay? Murray, Amen, he's loved by Amen. That is the royal name of Ursa Ma'at Ra, Septepen Ra, Ramesu Murray Amen, his royal throne name. Not Ramses II that you're most familiar with, Ramsey, but Ramesu, if we say it for short. Chosen, Septepen Ra, this is where European Jews get God's chosen children. It came out of Septepen Ra. Ra chose the first people. God chose the first people to be on the planet were African people. All anthropological records have documented that African people were the first people on the planet Earth. Ra has kissed you from the dawn of time. That's why you got melanin. You do not reflect the sun. You pull in the sun. You have melanin. So he knew he was chosen by Ra. So we should all know Septepen Ra. You're chosen by Ra. Because Ra has kissed you from the dawn of time. That's why you have melanin. Color of that succulent kiss that Ra has kissed you now down in Abu Simbel where you are right now. Seriously giving you a succulent kiss. All right? He's born of Ra. Okay? Your melanin telling you that you're born of Ra. Okay? He's loved of Amen. The same Amen that you say at the end of your prayers. We have no idea that it came from here. Amen. Amen. So when we say Amen, we should say Amen and put Amen in your mind. Now we're going to say his name collectively together because this is the Grand Master who built. So as our ancestors said, to speak one's name is to make them live again.
Areas, PBS had run a documentary called The West, and it was a documentary talking about the western part of North America. And I saw that, and I sat straight up on the bed when I heard them mention blacks that were in the West, and they were calling the blacks the Kali, and I'm imagining K-A-L-I or C-A-L-I. And that got my attention, and I went looking for this nation of blacks that were in the Americas in the 1500s. They were talking about the conquistadors as being the ones who had seen this nation of blacks. So I went looking and found books and writings and illustrations and maps that had nothing to do with the Kali, but had everything to do with what blacks had been doing in the Americas from eventually what I found going on more than 22,000 years from the time of the foundation of Egypt. That surprised me to see writings that were showing Africans coming across the seas into the Americas and forming Egypt, what became known as Egypt. They did not call themselves Egypt, in the Americas. And when I say Americas, mostly I'm talking about Central America and South America, though there were cities and communities in North America as well. I found the records in Egypt and in other places, ancient records, that were talking about what had happened in the Americas, a full history of what these blacks had been doing in the Americas. I saw them building Memphis in what we now call Mexico. I saw thieves being built in South America. And eventually I saw the place that preceded both of those capitals. Egypt, as some people might know who delved very deeply into the history of those Africans, at first started in another place that some records call This, T-H-I-S, This. And it was said that Menes went from This and went to Memphis and built Memphis. But long before that, because we've got Menes at about 4,000 to 5,000 B.C., but the records were showing Amen and Horus and Isis and Osiris and the other names that those are known by in the records, living, it said, about 22,000 years before Alexander the Great. So that's a long way from Amen to Menes. But most records try to pick up the history of Egypt at Menes. They try to start somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 B.C. Well, that leaves a lot of that black history unknown, or at least undated. So I saw those things, and from there, I saw the other histories unfold. Once you know that the Old Testament is coming out of Egypt and then taking Egypt's cities, those Africans that we call Hebrews. Well, once you have Egypt in the Americas and you have Hebrews taking the previous African cities that were called Egypt, then that means we have the Hebrews in the Americas as well. And that's what I found. I found those images all over the Americas. I found the cities that they built. They had already been found, many of them. They didn't have their African names on them. Some of them were already being restored by archaeologists, and they were just not telling you that these were the cities that were in the Old Testament and in the Egyptian records. I think secretly many of them knew this. So that would fit into the name of your program, the occult science. If it's hidden science, if it's hidden knowledge, that's definitely going to fit, because they knew that these cities were those ancient, classical, and even prehistoric, they called them, cities. So that's where it came from. I saw the record. This is not the kind of knowledge that you're going to find coming out in USA Today, or Newsweek, or Time, or even National Geographic. I've addressed this with them, and it's just not a subject that they really want to address. I thought it was a racial thing at first, but I came to Facebook several months ago to see. I wanted to test to see what's really going on, where the intellect was, where the resistance was, and I found we have as much resistance in the black side of humanity as we do the other side of humanity to these histories. Blacks are not ready for their own history, especially when we start saying Egypt and the biblical histories are occurring or were occurring in the Americas. They're not ready for that. The secret order to Columbus was, okay, we want you to go to Panama, where Egypt long ago had started building the canal, because once we go over into the Caribbean to reach Jerusalem, we still have to get to the Pacific side so that we can get to that city in South America that is and was ancient Jerusalem. So his order was, get to Panama, see what the military situation is, see if we really can take that place. We want to launch one more crusade and try it one more time. And Columbus came into the islands, where we now have Haiti and Dominican Republic and some of the others. And I guess he got a little afraid himself. He didn't come into the mainland, see, and then he kind of got addicted to the drugs and the women and the other things, trying to find gold. And eventually they sent soldiers to put him in chains and to bring him back to Spain, and to tell him, you didn't fulfill the obligation. The obligation was for you to check the military situation at Panama. And so on his fourth voyage, he made a beeline from Spain to Panama to check the situation, to check if it was, in fact, lightly enough guarded that they could launch an invasion and take that place. And then he went to South America, didn't go into it. He pretty much stayed on those ships. But he made this strange comment when he got to the Orinoco River that's coming out of the northern coast of South America. And he says, this river has its origin in paradise. It was one of the strangest things to be written by him. There was one other that's stranger, but this one was strange, unless you knew that this was where the ancient cities and the ancient histories had occurred. And he was right. The Orinoco River does originate in the mountains of South America, where Jerusalem and some of the other holy places were, and where Adam had lived. Adam, do I want to say this? Let's hold this one. Adam
no, this is a cult science radio. There's no hold barred here.
We'll bring him out later. Adam is in the Egyptian records. He is named in the Egyptian records very clearly. You will see him under the name A-T-U-M, and Atum becomes Adam. He is Amen. He is the founder of Egypt. That's your Adam of the Genesis account, of the biblical account. It's Atum, A-T-U-M, becomes A-D-A-M. He's the same guy. And it's Amen, under his several names of Amen and Amun and Amun and all of those. So when you get into the biblical records, you're going to get to Revelations 3 and 14. You're going to see a strange verse that talks about this man called Amen, A-M-E-N, who lived at the first of creation. Well, for you to understand that, you have to understand that Genesis is not talking about the creation of the world. That's a mistake that we thought Genesis is talking about. Genesis is a record of Egypt, of the African nation, the empire that became known as Egypt. These are the Egyptian priests writing the history of their nation. And that part was adopted and put into the biblical writings along with later accounts of what was happening in Egypt. And so they're beginning it at the formation of Egypt, when Amen lived. That's why when Cain kills his brother, he's concerned that people in the world will kill him for the murder that he's committed. And it says that when he left this place, he went into a city and took himself a wife. Well, if you've got Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and now Cain has slain his brother, you don't have a city you can go to. You don't have a city of people. You're at the beginning, if this is the beginning of the world. But that's not what that's about. That's an African record about the history of the African civilization that became known as Egypt. Columbus and the churches knew that in his day. He talked about this river Orinoco coming down out of the mountains and saying it originated in paradise. The other strange thing that Columbus mentioned and wrote about, and Washington Irving put it into his biography of Columbus as well, was that Columbus would go around talking about how he was going to capture Jerusalem when he made it into the Americas. Now, some scholars will argue, no, he did not say that he was going to capture Jerusalem in the Americas. Well, we don't have any record of him going to the Middle East to try to capture it over there. He knew that it was over here, and he really did have these high dreams that he would lead the crusade that would recapture ancient Jerusalem. So, when we talk about slave ships and that era, we have to understand that after Columbus, then they sent the armies back in. He had done some of the surveillance work to see where the armies were, some of it. And then they came in. Now, here's the strange thing. When you see Spain come in and capture Mexico, and when they write this history, when Prescott and others wrote this history of the invasion of the Americas, they title it The Invasion and Capture of Mexico and the Invasion and Capture of Peru. Well, if you look on anybody's map, you'll see how far those two lands are apart. And to find Peru, you really have to know something about the Americas, because it's hidden in a mountain on the backside of South America. Well,
wow.
In a mountain and the other one. But when you talk about an invasion, and you're talking about capturing two places that are as distantly related as Mexico and Peru, that should signal you that something is going on. But that's exactly what was happening. They were capturing the capital, the ancient capital of Egypt, Memphis, that was built in Mexico. That's why all those pyramids are all over that place. And then they went and captured Jerusalem, the other Egyptian capital that had been Thebes in South America. So the clues are everywhere for you to see it. And open, then you can. We've got pyramids on the Nile in Northeast Africa. We have Egypt there. Why would you say that Egypt is in the Americas when we can clearly see that Egypt is right here where these pyramids and the Sphinx are? To clear that up, you have to understand that there was an African civil war in the Americas. The biblical writings refer to it in their writings under the book called Exodus and some of those nearby. When these blacks revolted and had this civil war against the other blacks that were Egypt in the Americas, that tore Egypt apart. When you read what was happening in those wars and the killings, the outright slaughters, they will shame what's happening at Rwanda and some of these other places now. Or they will show you that those same kinds of horrendous things were going on in ancient times. And that's what was happening. And they had the upper hand. They were stronger under Moses and Joshua and some of these other African leaders. And they were winning against these African cities that were Egypt. And when you read that they were going to destroy them to their very root, was the understanding. Then those that were able got out of the Americas. They fled, that were running Egypt. And they they couldn't go to West Africa because that was one of the bases for the blacks that were known as Hebrews. They had made it to West Africa out of the Americas before they launched their attack on the Americas. So they couldn't go to West Africa. That was the strength. That was walking into the mouth of a lion. So they went around to the eastern side of Africa and formed a second civilization there, an offshoot of the one that had come here. Now, to be clear, the Africans who had formed the Egypt in the Americas had come from Africa to begin with. So the ideas that they brought to the Americas were already flowering in Africa. And when you look at Hatshepsut's temple on the Nile, the ancient temple there, you know, it's clearly written when they talk about the expeditions to Punt that Egypt's understanding was that they had come from a civilization that was on the eastern side of Africa where this expedition went to. And you can look at the animals that are being loaded on the ships in those drawings, and you can get an idea about where that place was and about where at least the Egyptians during the time of Hatshepsut were saying that they thought they had originally come from. So if the Africans from Eastern Africa had made their way into the Americas and that became the beginning of the Egypt in the Americas, so be it. But now they had come back to the eastern side of Africa and started building that Egypt. So archaeologists will tell you we see all these monumental buildings going on from the 12th dynasty coming forward. And that's exactly where I found the autobiography of Moses. It was in the 12th dynasty of Egypt. So it's all right there in the records for you to see what was going on and to be able to piece this thing together. Once they got to the eastern side of Africa, now you've got two Egypts. And eventually that Egypt came back in, got as strong as it had been at first, and we conquered its cities in the Americas. And you'll see those wars and those narratives from then on, where they're coming in, they're regaining, and then losing, and then regaining the Americas. Under Pianke, there is a very enlightening record left by that pharaoh. And you will see a part of Brazil still named for him. You know, and people don't discern it. You know, here is Pianke's name, first and last, on these two large districts against the Atlantic coast of Brazil, above the place that's called Sir Egypt del Rey, which meant belonging to the king of Egypt. That still shows on the map too, Sir Egypt del Rey. So you have this land that belonged to Egypt in South America that shows on the maps. And then right above it, you have this huge area of land, two districts. One carries the first name of Pianke, and the second district carries the second name. But under Pianke, he says he came from that area over to Peru, and then he's leaving an itinerary of where he's going in his reconquest of the cities. And he's traveling up through Central America in ships, and he's telling you where the cities are, the ancient cities are. And he's telling you where he's stopping and what he's doing. And eventually he makes it to Mexico, where Memphis was. And he leaves. He left this record that tells you that when he got to Memphis, he just started cursing, you know, because it was out on an island, and they could find no way to attack this city that was out on this island. And black historians don't quite get it. They did not understand that ancient Memphis had been built on an island out in the middle of a man-made lake. A man-made island built out in the middle of a man-made lake. And not in the middle, but out in the lake itself. And this became one of the, what they call the ancient wonders of the world. It was the lake called Tashi. And that lake was still there when the Spaniards came in the 1500s, and they drew illustrations of it, and they wrote about it, you know, and black historians are missing all of this good stuff because they're not turning their sights to the right places. They're not putting the ancient narratives against what they're seeing in the Americas. They want to follow Dr. Van Sertima's groundbreaking work, and I don't know if it's the correct thing to say groundbreaking, since there were others that were influencing Dr. Van Sertima, and he was extending their work. But what he was writing about was a black presence, and for some reason, no one had gone in to check the narratives, the ancient black narratives, to see if they were describing the Americas. And they were. So when you go into those ancient narratives, one of the things you're going to find out is that other blacks came from West Africa into Central America during another horrendous war, the war called Troy. That's a black war. That's an inter-African war called Troy in Central America. And it's bringing thousands of blacks out of Africa into this major event. And some of them, many of them, stayed in the Americas and started forming other cities on top of Egypt's cities and building other ones outside of those satellites. And that became known as Achair, or ancient Greece. African. The Greeks are African, not the people now claiming the name. The ones who are in your ancient narratives, these are Africans. And they were in the Americas, and so when they're building these cities, and they're building them often on top of other cities or extending the other cities, so this becomes Athens, and then you have Sparta sitting there. You have Delphi and Delphi. They have the different ways they want to say it, but, you know, anyway, Delphi is sitting there. is sitting there. Delphi, you will have the Greek accounts from the historians, from the Greek historians, the African historians called Greeks. And they're telling you the history of the city. And when your eyes are open and you're reading the ancient narratives, you will understand that here is the same place that ancient Egypt was talking about as well. And the biblical record is talking about it too, because this is one of the most famous oracles in all the world. Here is where the people came, the leaders came, the presidents of the nations, their pharaohs, would come and ask the oracle, what say you? What should I do? Should I invade? Should I fight this? Should I join this alliance? What does God tell me I should do? And the oracle is sitting there at Delphi in Central America. And this is the place that Horus had come and taken once he defeated Cain, the biblical Cain, who is ancient Egypt's Khan, K-H-O-N. Once he defeated Heracles or Khan or Khonsu, now he's in power, and he makes this oracle become his. So its history goes all the way back 22,000 years before Alexander the Great. That temple is sitting there. That oracle is sitting there. And they would have games there, like the Olympic Games. These are the Pythian Games, every 4 years. And you will see what they call ball courts. When you find modern white scholars, they go all over the Central America looking for the ball courts, the Maya ball courts. These are not ball courts. These are the stadiums where they were having these athletic and musical games and competitions. This is the Delphi Games, and that's why you're going to have a stadium there for the competitions that were going on there at Delphi. But now we're up to date. So let me bring us to this year. You asked about the place, Delphi.
Oh, yeah.
I found the ancient African records that describe everything about the city, from the way the city is laid out, from the hills to the river, the situation, where it was, where the river is, where the stadium is, which monuments are there, what they look like. It named them, showed you where they are. And then it came to this amazing building. And they say, in this building are the paintings where the warriors would gather and talk. This is the painted temple. And then it would go in and start describing the scenes that are painted on the wall. And you have over 200 people painted in this temple. And Agamemnon, the African called Agamemnon is there, and the African called Achilles is there, and the African that was David's mother, King David's mother is there, and the famous Africans and that were called Greeks and the famous Africans that were called Trojans are painted all over this temple with their actual portraits by one of the most famed painters at that time.
Wow.
And the descriptions are there, and they tell you, here is Agamemnon, and this is what he has up under his left arm. This is what he's wearing. This is the kind of helmet he has on. This is what he's doing with his hand. He's standing. The man before him is kneeling. The one to the side of him is laying down. The one behind him is Achilles, and this is what he has on, and this is what he's doing. And behind him, over to the back, is a woman holding a baby, and the baby is holding his hands up to his eyes. When you have these kinds of descriptions, and then you find a temple in Central America that has every one of these images still painted in it, then you found ancient Delphi. And that's what was found. So when I told National Geographic in 2008 I was going to hold it. I didn't want to give it to him because I knew that ancient record had a lot more information. And I said, if I give this to them, they're going to go into the African king's tomb and start pulling those kings out, just like they're doing in Egypt. And I held it. I held it for 10 years. I just would not give it. But then I said, if I'm not going to be able to get blacks to understand and accept their own history, I've got to get one of the mainstream groups to publish the stories so that our blacks can finally believe their own history. And so I gave National Geographic one of the ancient accounts about Delphi to show them what was there and to show them that temple was described in detail. That was June 2008. And the woman wrote back, "Thank you, Horace. I am amazed at this," and she's going on. But, Horace, I am not able to, her word, entice the magazine to run the story. And then I went to USA Today. Dan Vergano is the science writer. And Dan seemed to be very, very interested, and we talked, and I shared information with him, and we went back and forth for a couple of months. And he says, "I want this story," and then the next thing I heard was, "My editor won't run it unless a Maya scientist or scholar confirms it." Well, they never confirmed Dr. Van Sertima's findings. In fact, when I talked to one of them in Dallas, he admitted, "Horace, there's no Mayanist who values their career who will admit that there is a black presence in pre-Columbian America. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen."
What?
So they knew what they were asking me to do. They knew that they were asking me to get an approval that was not going to be gotten. See, so that kills that story with USA Today. All right, so then I said, well, let me just talk to an archaeologist or scholar who I've talked with some years before, and I went to the professor at Harvard, Dr. David Carrasco, and I gave him the same information, said, "Here's Delphi. Vet it, and I need your help on getting the story broken." And he was very interested, and all of a sudden the contact stopped, couldn't reach him, he was gone, and his university finally told me he had taken sabbatical. Next thing I know, the story broke in January of this year that they have found the tomb beneath the painted temple at the city of Bonampak in Mexico. Well, that's Delphi. These were the writings that I gave them. And they did exactly what I knew they would do. They would start pulling out the ancient African kings. And that was their interest. They were not interested in showing the world that this was ancient Delphi and that these were the Africans that were Agamemnon and Achilles. They were not interested in that. They were not going to tell the world that the Greeks were blacks. Their interest was directly into getting to that tomb of that man who was buried, who the description said was buried beneath the painted temple, beneath the second room of the painted temple. And they went directly in it. Now, the explanation they gave was, we found this tomb doing conservation work using sonar. And when I gave that to other archaeologists, they just laughed at it. That's not how we do conservation work. They didn't find that using sonar doing conservation work. They used sonar to see if those descriptions were correct in saying that was a tomb with a man inside beneath that second room of paintings. And when they saw that those ancient writings were correct, they went into the tomb and published that story. It's everywhere on the net. The tomb discovered at Bonampak in Mexico. So that brings us there. Now, if you are an occult interest in your network, there is an occult attachment to the story. That man that's buried in that tomb was one of the most feared men, that had lived on the time of the Trojan War. This is Achilles' son, who had desecrated religion and the temples and had done some things that were just so horrendous that when people heard of it, they could not believe that a man had done such a thing to offend God, and at that time gods. You know, they just could not believe that someone had done what this man had done. And for what he did, the sacrilege he did when he went to Delphi, they killed him. And they buried him in that temple. And that's whose tomb they opened. One of the most feared men. And not long after that, Haiti's grounds crumbled. And you might not understand this, but once that happened, then the rain started falling on Peru and started washing away the roads there. That's a country that hardly experiences rain. But here's a rain so heavy that it washed out the roadways and stranded visitors to Machu Picchu. The grounds broke in Haiti. The rains came at Peru after they went in that man's tomb. Anyway, that's your story of Delphi. When I first wrote this book, an agent came in and she said that she could guarantee a large advance on the book if I would take out the black presence and take out the biblical discovery.
What?
Well, they will tell you that when you find these major pockets of Africans in South America, and even at the place where Ivan Van Sertima had come from in Guyana, they'll tell you that's a remnant of what was brought over during slavery. There were slaves, and there were not slaves. There were Africans kidnapped and taken out of Africa and brought into South America, of course. But when you have over 22,000 years of history of blacks in the Americas, they didn't all pack up and leave the Americas when Spain came in and started invading. So yeah, you're going to have the black cities, the ancient black cities, and the blacks themselves and their descendants in South America. So Brazil was major. It's my belief that whole nation called Brazil is named for the African who saved King David. You'll see that in the Old Testament writings that when his son took the city, Absalom came in to take David's throne, he fled. And he went to West Africa. He went to Mali. They call it M-A-H-L-I, but it's Mali. It's M-A-L-I, Mali in West Africa. And that the king there who took him under his wing and kept him, who kept King David, was, they'll call him Mount Barzillai. But you just flip your R and your A and put it where it is. So either Brazil should be Barzillai, or the king's name in the Old Testament should be spelled a little differently. But I'm thinking Brazil is named for that king that helped David. In fact, when you read the biblical accounts, south of the Amazon River is Moab, which is going to put you right back in West Africa where this king was. So all those things are related. Yeah, there are Africans that were in the Americas long before the transatlantic kidnapping began.